And I would like to thank everyone for coming on board. This is the first of a series called Titans on Leadership. And we are asking different alumni and associates of Detroit Mercy to talk a little bit about their pathway from Detroit Mercy to the success that they experienced and what they had to go through, what they went through, mentors that they used, just tips to help us all learn a little bit more about leadership. So today we have Jeff Antaya, and I'm going to let him share a little bit more about himself, but I want to thank him for sharing his journey with us today and turn it over to you, Jeff.
Great. Thanks, Peggy, and hello, everyone. I do want to start by thanking Peggy and Sonia and Anisha for inviting me to speak with you today. As you can see from my career, my title of this, which I had some fun with on social media, I wish I could tell you that I enjoyed a straight path to the success I had and that, I knew when I was in diapers where I was going to end up. And that wasn't the case. And so I've looked back and tried to put this together for you with some of the best things that I learned, but knowing that I made many mistakes along the way. But like I said, I don't know if it was blind luck or somehow somebody was guiding me, but it kind of all worked out in the end. And my path was uh, all over the place, if you will. And the one thing I would say is I just really have never been afraid of change. And I know that some people can get a little bit stuck by not by being afraid of what's ahead if it's not what they expected. And I don't think that I was flagrantly flitting from thing to thing to thing, but I did try to listen for where there were opportunities. And, it started, I was admitted to the University of Detroit Mercy. I grew up in a family where there was very few college graduates. And so my parents insisted that I go to college, but they didn't really know what any of that meant or anything. So I was my sisters and I were all sort of left to figure that out for ourselves. And so, I think I was always a pretty good listener and observer to see what I saw of success in other people and figured out what might work for me. And I realized pretty early on that I think there were multiple pathways to success. I started at U of D at University of Detroit Mercy in biology. I was going to go to pre-dent, and after a couple of years, that didn't work out, and I moved into the accounting department, and I got my MBA, and I started and worked at Price Waterhouse, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers, for about 10 years. And I knew that auditing and accounting really wasn't going to be my path forward. But I did understand that path, and I was really fortunate enough at one point. I had an audit client, which was NBC, and it was WDIV in Detroit. And we were working late at night. It was the audit was a quick thing. And I was talking to these guys who were sitting in the lobby. We were having a cup of coffee before I went back to work or something. And they were talking about building cell towers. And I was like, cell towers, what would that be? And so they were telling me about how they're putting these systems up and blah, blah, blah. And boy, lo and behold, a couple years later, I had an opportunity to go work at Cellular One, which was the precursor to Verizon that we know today. And I remember interviewing with the president of the Michigan division. And I said, do you think these cell phones are really ever going to catch on? Do you think people are going to feel so self-important that they have to carry around a device where people can get a hold of them at all times? And he said, well, we certainly hope so. And then we talked about what that would take, because at that point, a cell phone was $1,200. Cell minute was $1.60 per minute. So it wouldn't be unusual for people who are really using it to get a $600 or $700 a month cell bill. And certainly that wasn't going to what led to the masses getting cell phones. And so I was really fortunate to be in that and watch that transition of what marketing and pricing and all the other things did as I transitioned. There I was the controller at Cell One, and then Nextel, which was the next cellular company, I had the opportunity to get in really on the ground floor before they even launched operations as a customer service person. And the great thing about the cellular industry is it was growing really fast. And so able-bodied people who were willing to learn were welcomed. So it didn't matter what your past necessarily was. It was really what your talents were and how well you could perform, which might be like if I were starting out today and we're thinking about AI or still a great deal of digital marketing, like for me, I found one of the successes is I always sort of gravitated towards a new niche, and I embrace that. And I know it sometimes scares people. When we were hiring salespeople at Nextel, and I remember we were opening our office in Grand Rapids, and they're a very conservative market, and a lot of people didn't want to go work for a brand new company. And I always sort of viewed it as, let's give it a try, and if it doesn't work out, I'll go do something else. So I had many different careers, and but this shift towards marketing really ended up being my thing. And I ended up being the chief marketing officer for Plante Moran for 13 years. And this funny story there is, they didn't know because I had an accounting background, I had a marketing background, but I didn't have accounting marketing background. 21 interviews later, they offered me a job on a trial basis. And I stayed there 13 years, and I was the first person to make partner from the marketing team. So it all ended up working out. But again, my path might be one of those paths that's less traveled. And it's not like I had a lot of confidence. I guess I wasn't afraid that I might make a mistake. So today I've sort of put this together around several key themes in my career that I think would be beneficial. The first one really are your personal qualities and skills. And I say the first one, all these, I think many of you would say, well, that's obvious. But you'd be surprised at how many people are not necessarily, uh, they're not the nicest people in the world. And it's not because they're introverted. It's just maybe that there's different situations. And I would say if you're working, be enthusiastic, be there, be part of the environment, be open-minded to what people might ask you. I would be inquisitive, and we're going to talk about different areas where that can really help you. A little bit of humble pie. I said I came from a pretty uh, uh, background of blue and gray collar workers. And so I didn't really have a lot of experience. And so I was humble almost to the point of being, uh, I guess a little, not naive's not the right word, but probably a little self-conscious, and maybe a little less of that and a little more humble and confident would have been helpful. But, the things that I've learned as far as in business is really, and marketing people, like as I moved to marketing, and you say I had my undergrad was in, my graduate degree was a focus in marketing. And that is, you really have to think about results. As you're moving through your career, these next four things are really, as you generate ideas, people love new ideas, but they love new ideas that advances the ball. And so thinking about, if I come up with this idea, how many more customers can I get? Or how much can I drive up revenue? The thing that really benefited me going into marketing was, I was a CPA, I had a decent amount of accounting and finance acumen. And what I learned was the finance team is always in the decision process. So being able to really speak their language and not saying, well, we should do marketing because everybody's on Facebook. It's like, okay, if Facebook is our audience on Facebook, how can we benefit from that? If we spend some money, what's the ROI? So your career, I've never met somebody who really advanced in their career that couldn't really put together a decent financial argument about their ideas and their ability to sell their ideas, which is a big part about finance. But, I think I got into accounting because I was afraid that, I didn't want to put myself out there, and I didn't want to jeopardize people's self-opinion of me or their opinion of me. And I didn't want to have to argue for my ideas. And I ended up having to do that, and I was pretty decent at it. But you have to know to sell your ideas. No matter if you stay in marketing or you advance or whatever you do, if you want to not be an entry-level person your entire life, that's I think an important aspect. As well as any business, no matter if you're in the controller team or you're in the marketing team or you're in operations, sales are what drive a business. And so that's always going to be the highest priority. So to the extent that you can figure out how you support that, either directly or indirectly, is really important. And the last thing, which there's probably classes now that really weren't really what I would call project management classes. And I would say, I'll say as a supervisor, like the last thing you want to do is have somebody come to you on the day and hour a project is due and say, I'm not going to make my deadline. Because if I'm your manager, I can't help you at that point. There's no way we can make this on time. So it's always going to be delayed. If you're able to figure out a couple days ahead or a week ahead, like I can't really see the trajectory of me getting to the end state in the days we've got left, and going to my supervisor and saying I need help or this is what I'm experiencing, you look like you're in the driver's seat. Otherwise, if you like, oh, it just didn't happen, it's never gonna, you're never gonna appear like you're in the driver's seat. And I remember I was putting in a new website and I was dealing with the web development team, and I was sitting there going, I just don't see us getting this done in 4 days. And the people who were doing it said, well, we don't know, we might get it done. And I really had a lasting negative impression of those people because I thought, if I'm able to see, and I'm not a website design expert, that we're not going to make it, why did they lead me astray? So that's I think that's really, project management is really an important one, however you interpret that for yourself.
And can I
Um,
interrupt real quickly, Jeff? I
yeah,
forgot to tell people, you can write questions in the question and answer section. I'm going to be monitoring them. And as they become appropriate to what he's saying, I will jump in and ask those questions. So feel free to put in questions in the question and answer section.
great. Thank you, Peggy. This next one, I was reminded of it because I was talking to a young student at Grand Valley and we were talking about a marketing. He's going into marketing and he likes sales. And he hadn't really thought about the idea about what kind of a company he would like to do marketing and sales in. And, for him, I was like, well, a lot of times I talk to young men who are really interested in sports. Is that something you'd be interested in? And he didn't, it wasn't really planned. And so I would really, as you're thinking about your career, thinking about what kind of skills you want to develop, and if there's a type of business you'd like to work in, that would match your personality, and then really study that. And even in my career, where you can see that I changed from accounting to being a controller to being in customer service to being in sales and marketing, where I ultimately ended up. I took the time to think in each of those spots, like what would be the next 2 or 3 spots ahead of me that I should be adjusting my career for. And then, as I said to begin with, like if there's adjustments, like just because I've identified what the next 3 roles are ahead of me in my finance career, shouldn't necessarily stop me from at least learning about sales and marketing. So it's an ongoing process and it does take time. And I think, just from a time management perspective, as we mature and we find significant others, we might get children or our parents might need it's hard, but these are things that are important to work into the balance of your life. Communication skills, I can't say enough about this. And the most important thing, I think, is really this understanding that as a communicator, we have the responsibility to make sure that the audience understands what we're saying. It's not like volleyball where you hit it over the net, and if they get it or they don't get it, it's up to them. If we really want to accomplish change through communication, we've got to think about what is it going to take for somebody to change. And especially, it might be like sharing a little bit of yourself and engaging them on a personal level. But it most often is about multiple exposures to what your ideas are. So very often it's really a matter of exposing people to the ideas multiple times. And one of the things that I kind of learned, I'll say the hard way, is that if I appeared like I was going to personally benefit from an idea I was trying to communicate, it sort of made the audience less likely to listen, or they were more skeptical. Where I was more non-committal, um, it was like, oh, and I had a really interesting story with that. And this is really dialing back several years, but as a gay man at Plante Moran and management, the managing partner was asking me, we were talking about healthcare benefits for domestic partners. And a question came up about a segment of the LGBTQ population. And I said, I really don't have an answer for that. And I was really surprised because I wasn't like fighting every argument. I was just fighting the ones that I really felt comfortable with. And being honest, I gained more credibility with the decision makers. And it really sparked conversation because when I said I didn't know, everybody's guards came down. And it was really interesting and important learning for me. Um, I don't think, as smart as most of us are, I've never really met anybody who kind of really did it all themselves. I've had some really, really wonderful mentors, um, and sponsors. And the difference between a mentor and a sponsor is, a mentor is really there to let me ask questions and figure out what my path forward is. Having an internal sponsor in an organization is somebody who maybe sees more potential in yourself than you do, and they speak up for you and they help you set your path forward. And seeking those both out internally and external to your company is really important. And the next thing is something that I really had to learn, and that is, if I'm trying to learn something, I want to learn a skill, or I want to have an experience, really being open with your supervisor about what that is really important. Because I will tell you, and my partner was the chief procurement officer for Daimler Chrysler, and we've had this conversation in that very few people will go in and say, I would really like to learn more about digital marketing, or I'd really like to learn more about when people open their emails. And so few people go to their supervisor and ask those kind of things, that they're sort of flattered and they will get on your side, and they might not be able to answer your question today, but they'll be in the back of your mind. Or you'd be surprised at how many times management will get together and say, here's a project, who do we have to put on it? And your supervisor might go, Jeff just was in here and asking for something. This would be a really good growth opportunity. But if you don't say anything, you won't necessarily get anything. And I guess that leads to another point that's not really on here. But if your supervisors think you're really good at something, don't poo-poo it. Like, listen to them and see if it's something that you might be even interested in experimenting about. And if they think you'd be good at it, they understand that maybe you haven't thought about it, and take their input and try it. I mean, it's very complimentary to be asked, and you sort of have no downside risk because you didn't raise your hand. But even if you do and it's experimental, I think I've watched people really blow up their career. I'd say blow up in a positive way, because they were the first ones to raise their hand and sign up for difficult assignments. And they didn't always have to work out, but we go back to that first slide about personal qualities, and it really demonstrates them. Um, staying current on the trends in your field and expertise. And I said, I've sort of used this as my calling card, even when I was in accounting and I wasn't, I really didn't like the idea of looking in the rearview mirror. What was exciting to me was like understanding new pronouncements that came out and learning about them and sharing them with my colleagues. I probably wasn't the best at looking at a client's books and reviewing them. That I just found that to be really boring. It wasn't my forte. In fact, when I got into sales and marketing, a lot of my fellow accounting students from U of DM said, "Oh, that's a much better fit." It's funny how people might see it before you do, but if you stay ahead of trends, there's always emerging opportunities. And for me, a big cellular telephone was obviously, I said, was really a big one. But when I got into accounting marketing, digital marketing was just in its infancy, and it really fascinated me. And I really explored it. And I would say now that in professional services, a lot of people would say, I was there on the forefront of it. And I really pushed the partners to understand it and understand social media and LinkedIn. And a lot of them were very hesitant. And I was pretty frank that I said, this is part of the future. It's up to you to decide if you want to be part of it or not. But if you want to be part of the future and you're going to be a partner in 10 years, you start now. And with these different things, like if you've gone to a webinar, you've read something and you want to learn more about it, explore that with your supervisor, bring them into the loop. I would suggest a pilot. Like, say, for instance, if you've gone out and studied email marketing and you decide that Tuesdays at 3 p.m. is a really great time to get open rates up, and you have some important stuff, like say, let's try that. I know we normally think 11 o'clock on Tuesdays, but let's try 3 o'clock, or try A/B testing. There's just new technologies out there all the time that can make people's lives somewhat easier. And so again, any of us is capable of bringing the next new great idea. This is a really important one as far as understanding both the clients and the competition. And I will tell you that from a firsthand perspective, that people that are at the decision table and understand this, it's really powerful. And it's really powerful to be able to say, Well, I was talking to a customer just the other day, and they said blah, blah, blah about this point. Or I was talking to my colleague who works at our competitor such and such, and I know that they're doing this. And there are things that they're not direct strategies which are secret, but how people, again, I'm using email because that's kind of an easy one, but how are they doing email? Or I remember one of our big competitors, which is a company now called Forvis, and we were all doing webinars. We were just starting doing webinars, and Forvis had a production studio, so they could broadcast their webinars from their building that their offices were in, and they had audio and visual and all the stuff they needed for a studio. And I thought that was the greatest thing in the world, and I wanted that. And so by being able to go to my boss and say, I think we really should, we didn't budget for this, but I think we should do it, and here's why, and our competitors are doing it, it was a really strong argument. We didn't end up doing it, and it was because of aging of technology, and when you use somebody else's, they have to keep it current. But it was a really strong point, and I brought in all the points that I could. And the other one is about knowing your customer. So at Plante Moran, we had a really significant wealth management practice. And we were always trying to figure out how to recruit new clients. And so I tried a lot of different things which weren't all that successful. But I came across some research which we tested, and it was sort of the idea that rich people don't often, they're not really going to take their ads and other things that are really going to influence them. But the thing that drives the needle for them is other people that they consider to be peers and what they're doing. And so one of the things we did is we went out and bought T-shirts with Plante Moran, or sweatshirts, and we had an in-person conference, and we gave them out, hoping that they would wear them around their friends and then provoke a question. So it was really making decisions on what your audience is. And I think the trend for all of us is to say, well, my parents are pretty well off. I understand what wealthy people do. Well, the difference between somebody who has $1 million and somebody who has $100 million can be night and day. And so instead of just making assumptions, see if you can prove it out, and you will be so valuable to your employer or yourself if you're self-employed. Another thing is about just kind of knowing what your own value is, like, right? And like to know what your worth in the marketplace is. And I say value, I'm talking about dollars here. I mean, I will tell you that it's my humble opinion that people who just work for salaries for hourly wage are going to probably always sort of be in the same economic situation. But if you can get ownership or stock options or a generous bonus plan, those kind of places can really catapult your career or your financial stability at least. And and knowing like kind of what your value is, even if I say, if I went to work in such and such industry, I'd be making $100,000 a year, but I'm happy to make $50,000 a year today because I'm learning such and such. That's totally appropriate. And if you, in a situation for me was, I loved Plante Moran. I really did. It was great. They have gave me a lot of flexibility. I was learning a lot. I was well respected. It was fantastic. But there came a point where I really felt like I was sort of taken advantage of, might not be the right term, but I wasn't being compensated for the value of my contribution. And a job came up that I really thought I'd be really good at it, which was running United Way of Detroit or of Southeast Michigan. And I knew the salary was 5 times what I was being paid. And so I was pretty open with my boss. They were a client of the firm, and I said, like I want to go interview for this job. And they were supportive. And one of the reasons was in salary, and they had no idea at all, like what my value was on the open market. And it changed our relationship. I didn't end up getting the job. I got a first interview and a second interview. Um, it really showed that they wanted me to stay at the firm, which was nice, but it also drove a different compensation point. So, but that wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have really understood what my own net worth is. And again, I'm not saying you have to go in and demand that immediately. I think you have to understand what the trade-offs are. This is a really important one, is that well-rounded people are really important, and work-life balance is really important. I think the thing that's interesting and that I learned in hindsight is that work-life balance doesn't mean that I work 8 hours a day every day. It might mean that I work 16 hours a day for 2 months and then I work 4 hours a day in the summer. Or it's different for different people in different professions. But in the course of a 12-month year, are you taking vacations? Are you spending time with your family or spending time with your friends? Do you have some hobbies outside of out of the office? And I wasn't always really good at this. Um, and I regret that now because I just really think that it's really important to your mental state. I think it helps you be more creative. Certainly, there are influences outside of whatever your office is, your day-to-day routine, which can have a significant impact. But if you're not available to go to them, you're never going to really be able to take advantage of them. So however work-life balance works for you, it's really important. And like I said, it doesn't have to be on a day-by-day basis. It may be weekly, it may be monthly, it may be semi-annually, but making sure you've got that. One thing that's been really helpful for me, or I've really enjoyed, is this idea of giving back. Because you grow, you end up growing more than what you're giving. But again, you're exposed to other ideas and other influences, and it's really beneficial. And even from a learning perspective, some of you may be in college or young in your career, the opportunity to take what and share it with others, either tutoring potentially, is a way to reinforce it, but it also sometimes helps you identify holes in your own learning, right? So again, it's giving you more than what you're getting. One of the last points I have is just building your network. And I know a lot of times people, sort of are in the moment and they're friends at the moment and they don't necessarily focus on their network. I love LinkedIn. I mean, I was, one of my friends at one time called me LinkedIn promiscuous because I had so many friends. But I started in LinkedIn, I think in 2006. And so I do have a big network, but it has really benefited me and it follows me from place to place. And so, whether they're grade school friends or high school friends, I remember one of my bosses at Plante Moran, he was the managing partner. And one of the people he interned with was a guy named Fritz Henderson, who I knew his wife from Cellular One. But the moral of the story is Fritz went on to be the head of General Motors, and my boss had lost contact with him. And the difference between calling somebody up and saying, we used to be interns together 40 years or 30 years ago, and having maintained contact is a huge difference. And so for a little bit of effort, especially today with social media and email, building a network and maintaining a network is really pretty easy. And many people, if they see you read your post on LinkedIn or get an email from you, it's indistinguishable. So there's a lot of ways, and there's so many different inputs we have, whether it's church or volunteering or people from work. People come and go all the time. Like maintaining friendships with people that leave your place of employment. And I got to tell you that in the last 13 years when I was at Plante Moran, I used my network so many times, and it really put me in a good light. It might help with a friend with somebody. I have a really good friend who was a trustee at University of Michigan, and like with somebody's kid was wanted to go there or something, like one of the best ways you can ingratiate with somebody is help their kids, right? So if there's different things, how you don't know how your network is going to come in, and there is no guarantee of it, but I will tell you that it can be a super valuable asset. That's kind of the bulk of my presentation. I've kind of talked at you for a really long time, and I apologize. But if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I know Peggy is going to and Sonia are going to send this presentation out to you, so you'll have it. And my email address is here. If you have follow-up questions, I'm always happy to help anybody. But if you have any questions, this would be the time.
Well, while some people are responding, is there one pinnacle point you saw in your career where you were like, yep, this is where I know I'm going, or was it just always being open seeing what's next?
You know, that's a really good question. And I think that the pinnacle question, the pinnacle time for me, Peggy, was this idea about jumping into the cellular industry and sort of riding that for 13 years. Um, because shortly after I accepted the position in Michigan, they merged with Ohio and they said, if you want your job, we wish we had told you this 3 months ago, but if you want your job, you're going to have to move to Columbus, Ohio. And I thought, I've never been in a merger and I've never relocated. I'll try that. And I could make that work for 3 years. And then it just kept leading to more and more stuff, which indirectly led to my job at Plante Moran. So there's a link to all that stuff. But the first time I sort of jumped off the career path that I thought I was destined on, being a CPA and a controller or a VP of finance, and explored other opportunities, the path really changed.
Great. Now we do have one comment and then a question. Someone says this was a great job. The world needs more Titans. But then someone's asking if you have tips on how to recession-proof your career.
Oh boy, that's a great question. And I don't. It's funny because when I was growing up, I thought I was going to recession-proof my career um, by staying out of the automobile industry. Like I had a lot of friends who went to work for Ford, GM, or Chrysler, and they paid really good money. But the experiences I learned in the long run that the experiences I got were better, and I felt I was more nimble. And I loved every job I had. If I didn't love it, I left. 10 years was sort of one of my limits. But um, I would say if you want to recession-proof your career, the best advice I can have is stay current with technology and be thinking about, advancements. So like right now, I would say like, okay, how can you find a career in AI? But that might only last for 10 years. Like in 10 years, you have to have thought about what's the next big thing. And so that sort of makes us all read more or talk to our friends more and be open to what other people are saying, even if you just tuck it away for later. But I don't think the idea of doing one thing and staying, because controllers were always a super steady job. I had clients, right? They'd be there for 20 years. And then private equity came in and they started buying up these companies and then they replaced the controller with somebody from their team or whatever. So I think it's really about your skill set in recession proofing than it is about who you work for, if that makes sense.
Yep. Awesome. Well, those were all the questions we had. I want to thank you again, Jeff. This was fabulous. I hope everyone listening enjoyed it. And we will do this again in February with another one of our alum. We will send out information leading to those. Thank you so much. This was
Thank you.
fabulous.
Okay. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.